gung-ho colonels in two very different movies, John Wayne and the Green Berets and Robert Duvall in Apocalypse Now. They're both fighting the same war, the war in Vietnam, and the way Hollywood has treated various aspects of the war in Vietnam is the topic we'll be exploring this time on Sneak Previews Take Two, one of those special change of pace programs where Gene and I take a look at trends and issues in the movies. And this is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
Across the aisle from me, Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. Now, there were a number of remarkable aspects to the way Hollywood has covered the Vietnam War. It ignored the war while it was going on. Once the war was over, though, Hollywood rushed to cover virtually every aspect of the war with some excellent films. On this show, Roger and I will look at scenes from such Vietnam War movies as The Deer Hunter, Apocalypse Now, Coming Home, Rolling Thunder, the documentary Hearts and Minds. But now Roger begins with Hollywood's first major film about the war, John Wayne's The Green Berets.
When John Wayne produced, directed, and starred in the enthusiastically pro-war movie The Green Berets, he got some very negative reviews from almost every critic in the country, myself included. And I still think the criticisms were richly deserved. The movie tried to force the complex morality of the situation in Vietnam into a simplistic war movie like the kind of World War II potboiler that John Wayne used to star in. But you had to give Wayne credit for putting his money where his politics were. The Green Berets was the only major feature, pro-war or anti-war, produced in Hollywood in the entire 1960s, and Wayne was the only producer willing to take a chance at the box office with the subject of Vietnam. And for Wayne, it was a chance to get back in an Army uniform for one last time and turn back the clock to the way they used to make war movies. No wonder the Department of Defense cooperated with Wayne on shooting The Green Berets. It sounds there like they wrote it. One movie studio executive called The Green Berets the worst screenplay he'd ever read, but Wayne went ahead with the movie anyway. He said the public wanted a Vietnam film, and he turned out to be right. The Green Berets was the second biggest box office success in Wayne's entire career after True Grit.
Yep. The thing that occurs is that this is the pro-war film. The war is good. What would follow later is the war is bad, anti-war films. It does surprise me, though, that Hollywood only would make one pro-war film.
You know, in a way, Hollywood didn't even make this one because Wayne's own company, Batjack, put up the money for this movie. Warner Brothers released it, but their money wasn't involved in it. And for 10 years after this film, there were no pro-war and no anti-war films out of the Hollywood studios. I guess they wanted to wait and see which way the wind was blowing before they risked their own hard-earned dollars.
Which way the wind is blowing is right, in the sense of who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. Hollywood likes to make films with obvious good guys and bad guys. They weren't so sure.
And then the problem was when they found out who it was, we turned out to be the bad guy. I guess they didn't like that so much.
No. Well, eventually there were some small Vietnam films that came out of the 70s, in the latter part of the 70s. The Boys in Company C, Who Will Stop the Rain, Go Tell the Spartans, and a documentary we'll take a look at later on that won an Academy Award, as a matter of fact, Hearts and Minds. But the Vietnam movie that probably had the greatest impact on the public arrived late in 1978, Michael Cimino's The Deer Hunter, which focused on the effects of the war on 5 young men who worked in a Pennsylvania steel town. 3 of the men, Robert De Niro, John Savage, and Christopher Walken, went off to war, and when these 3 steel workers were taken prisoner in Vietnam, they found a war more brutal than anything they had ever experienced. What The Deer Hunter did so well, I think, was make us care, first, about a number of characters, and then have them be crippled, brutally killed, or psychologically maimed in some way by the war. Now, you know, as much as the conventional wisdom has it that it was television news that really brought the war home to America, I think after we see a film like The Deer Hunter, that reminds us that unless we had actually been over there, or lived with someone who had been over there, we had very little idea, with all the TV news, of the war's true savagery.
That's true, and if you talk about the savagery of the war, I think the image in The Deer Hunters that really brought it home to us was that Russian roulette image that we saw a little bit of there. And in the movie, you actually do see the brutality of people being shot in the head.
At close range, yeah.
At close range with Russian roulette. Well, a lot of people said, well, that's too violent. Well, I think it's okay to have violence in a war movie. I don't know how you can make one without violence. But also people said, well, it's not accurate. They didn't really play Russian roulette over there. And I rejected that, too. I really do, because it seems to me that was a compact image that the director was able to use in order to condense the enormity of the violence. And where I think he got it was from that famous photograph of the public execution. The 2 Vietnamese, one with a pistol up to the other one's temple. The scene that we saw in Life magazine, the scene that we saw just now, had that very same kind of framing.
So in The Deer Hunter, its contribution is the violence. This was not a game. People were really getting nailed at close range. Number 2, I think that it showed us who fought the war, or at least a part of it. The people who fought the war were young black kids from the city and white working class kids. This film focused on the white working class kids. And we really got close to these people. We see them drinking in a pool hall. We see them have a wedding. We see them go on a hunting trip. these kids thought they were going on another hunting trip to Vietnam. And in one of the most remarkable edits, one of the most remarkable transitions in this film, we cut from them in the home in Pennsylvania to bang, right into Vietnam. It shocked us. It's a terrific film. A lot of people have been backing away from this picture. You liked it, I guess. I liked it a real lot.
And I still stand behind it. I think it was a great picture, no matter what some people now say the second time around.
Yeah.
And if The Deer Hunter went to great lengths to establish the real-life origin of its characters, the decade's other great Vietnam War epic went in an altogether different direction. Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now saw the war in almost surrealistic terms, as an exercise in collective madness in which the most insane actions took on a kind of logic and even a crazy nobility. Now, here's a scene like that. Robert Duvall plays a crazy army colonel whose perverse idea of battle strategy is to play classical music by Wagner over loudspeakers as he swoops in for a helicopter attack on a Vietnamese village. That incredible scene continues with the total destruction of a village, and all the suffering and death and incredible waste is so that Robert Duvall's troops can secure a beach where Duvall thinks the waves are great for surfing. The destruction of the village appalls us intellectually, but filmmaker Francis Coppola achieves something else here in Apocalypse Now that's much more complex, because if we're honest with ourselves, we've got to admit that when we watch that helicopter attack, we find it exhilarating, and in some kind of perverse way, Duvall is refreshing too, because at least he has a reason for acting as he does, even if it's a crazy reason. In the middle of a war fought in uncertainty and philosophical murkiness and gray areas of lies and deceit, Robert Duvall behaves with a manic intensity, possesses an absolute certainty about his motives, and through him, Coppola helps us understand why troops can follow madmen into battle.
Well, in addition to all that surreal stuff that you talk about, I think the film is very good in the first half of the picture in doing something else, in showing us the incredible way that we just very casually infused our culture on the Vietnamese. And I think what Coppola is saying is that if we can, as he shows in the picture, go water skiing down a Vietnamese river, have a disc jockey play top 40 hits on a Vietnamese radio station, have helicopters that play music on stereo systems. If we can do all those things, there's Playboy bunnies that come to entertain. If we can put all that American stuff in Vietnam, then the logical extension is you put the bombs in there too. The film almost seems to be saying in the first half that if we have technology, if we have stuff, then we'll spread it all around, because everybody obviously wants what we got.
We might as well use the stuff we have, right?
Yeah.
But I'll defend the second half of the film because, well, it's based on Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, which is about kind of crazy externals, people at the beginning of a trip up a river, and then at the end, the externals get more and more interior until they're inside a mind that's crazy too, and I think that's what the movie is doing here.
You mean Marlon Brando?
With the mind of Marlon Brando at the end of this journey, because these people start out with all their support systems, all their toys, all their gadgets, their surfboards, their stereos, and the further upriver they get, the more that stuff is absorbed by the jungle. It's like the jungle, which represents Vietnam, says, okay, throw all this stuff in here. Give me your Playboy bunnies instead of your tired masses, your huddled masses, and so forth. Give me your Playboy bunnies. Give me your stereo systems. Give me all of these toys. I'll absorb them, the jungle says, and the rest is silence. And at the end of the movie, that's what happens. The entire American presence goes right up that river and disappears.
That's a good defense of the last half of the picture. Very good.
Thank you very much.
One of my favorite films that deals with the war is not about men in battle, but about the war at home and the generation who fought it at home. The film is Hair, Milos Forman's brilliant version of the 60s musical stage play. In the Forman film, we follow an Oklahoma farm boy who's been drafted. And one of the most compelling images I think ever put on film, we see young soldiers marching toward the belly of a hungry plane on its way to Vietnam. A powerful moment in Hair.
Yeah, it sure is.
Which was released just last year, and I think it served as sort of a documentary of the entire 60s. It's all there. The protest against the war, the generation gap, people fighting with each other. To see it now, I think, is to feel a certain sadness, oddly enough, a sadness for a time, the 60s, when our whole country seemed to be obsessed in what our country was doing. I don't know if we have the same concern today. Let me talk first, though, about that image into the plane, which I love. That's one of my favorite images in any movie. I remember being in basic training in '68 when the film is set. I didn't have the vision to imagine people walking into a plane like the director Milos Forman does. But I was taking basic training with kids that I knew were going to Vietnam. I knew I wasn't. I was going to be stateside. I knew that they were going off someplace and they weren't coming back. The film is very, very, very moving in that way. I don't know, the appetite of war.
Yeah, I still can't understand why more people didn't want to go see Hair, which so many critics, ourselves included, thought was one of the great films of last year. And I think you're right to touch on that bit of nostalgia that we feel about that time, because The movie, for example, has the song The Dawning of the Age of Aquarius. Well, now the Age of Aquarius has set. That time is over. It's done with. You look at the costumes in this movie, the love beads, the hippie costume. This is almost more of a period movie in terms of costumes than a cowboy movie would be. The people look like they're from another time or another planet, and yet we were those people just a few years ago. And at that time, the country, in a way, it was divided in its we were together in our division, is what I'm trying to say. We were together in the way that we were all fighting over this great issue, and that was the way that the movie says, at least, that democracy works.
Yes, and it was, oddly enough, made by a foreigner. He's now an American citizen, but it was made by a Czechoslovakian, Milos Forman. I think the film is really a celebration of democracy in a way, of that freedom of discussion. Obviously, that's what appeals to him. Frequently in the film, he shows young people and old people standing face to face and arguing. Now, presumably, everybody wants the same thing, peace, goodness, but they're arguing about it ferociously. Today, what are we talking about? Gas lines? The price of gold?
I have a feeling that those arguments meant a lot to Forman, having just come out of Czechoslovakia after the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia. Come over here, I think he was making a movie that meant a lot to him as well as meaning a lot to us. But there were a lot of other different kinds of casualties from the war in Vietnam. For example, the returning veterans brought their physical and psychic wounds back home with them, and by the late 70s, there were a few movies that were beginning to deal with the subject of returning Vietnam veterans. The Deer Hunter, which we just looked at earlier, had a long concluding passage about the returning heroes, and Rolling Thunder, a very good, very scary drama that was ignored by the public at the box office, devoted itself to the story of one returning prisoner of war and his mental wounds that still hadn't healed. The Vietnam veteran was played by William Devane, and here he is talking with a friend about how he was tortured. William Devane in a very strong performance in an overlooked movie called Rolling Thunder. We have the feeling there, I think, that his psychic wounds are never going to heal. That was also true of two characters in Coming Home, another very strong film about Vietnam. In Coming Home, Jane Fonda stood between two Vietnam veterans, her lover, John Voight, who was confined for life to a wheelchair, and her husband, Bruce Dern, who is terrified that the war is going to drive him mad. Rolling Thunder and Coming Home, two films about the very painful attempts of a Vietnam veteran to re-enter American society. And if you add in films like The Deer Hunter and Hair, you realize an interesting thing about Hollywood's treatment of this different kind of war. The movie makers paid a great deal of attention to the impact of the war on the home front. During World War II, the war movies, with a few exceptions like The Best Years of Our Lives, were heroic blood-and-guts battle films designed to build up the morale of a nation committed to war, but the United States was never fully committed to Vietnam. Feelings at home ranged from uneasiness to outrage, and that was very clearly reflected in all of these films about the scars of the returning veterans.
I think what we see in the Vietnam veteran films, if you want to call them that, is really trading sort of an old cliche for a new cliche. The old cliche was that the soldier came home and he was the hero. His girl married him, hugged him, parents were beaming and happy. And here, they come home, they're ignored. Maybe they have a band play, and that's it. That's the last contact they have, the last positive reinforcement, like in Rolling Thunder.
And then they turn into kind of a walking time bomb.
That's the other thing. That's the real cliche, I think, that these guys are fruitcakes ready to go off at any minute. And that's probably unfair, too. It's a very easy symbol, and it makes a very dramatic thing. Violence can pop any time, so it's very good for the movies. I'm sure it's insulting to a lot of Vietnam veterans who either were able to handle the experience or are able to rationally deal with their anger.
One thing, looking at these two clips, I think, looking back, that Rolling Thunder, which was a movie that was really overlooked, is just about as good as Coming Home. It's got all those honors.
I agree. It didn't have the stars, but it has the same emotional impact. I think if there is one fault, as we look at these Vietnam films, if there's one fault that all of the American Vietnam films share, it's they've avoided one aspect of the war, and that is the effect of the war on the Vietnamese. Maybe the reason Hollywood has avoided the Vietnamese is that no studio executive thinks that a story about the Vietnamese would sell tickets. There are, after all, no Vietnamese stars in Hollywood. Now, the one film that did not forget the Vietnamese was a 1974 documentary that we mentioned at the beginning of the show. That's Hearts and Minds. It was directed by Peter Davis, produced by Bert Schneider. These men were clearly against the war effort, and what they did was take the crude pro-war statements of some of our own military and government leaders. I think they had a general in the film say that they had captured this on regular TV footage, say that the Orientals do not value human life as much as the Americans. Well, they took that statement and put it up against real footage of suffering Vietnamese who did obviously care. A memorable scene was a visit to a devastated Vietnamese village and to the distraught father of a Vietnamese family. This man, you'll see, is not an actor. That's a side of the war Hollywood hasn't covered, the war's effect on the Vietnamese people. Frankly, I'm not too optimistic about Hollywood making too many more Vietnam films either about Americans or Vietnamese. It seems like almost every movie studio has tried one. They are risky at the box office, these films. None of them has made a big profit, and their subjects are, for the most part, very downbeat. Therefore, that scene of the angry Vietnamese father is in all probability one of the few Vietnamese images we'll ever see come out of Hollywood. And that, of course, makes that image only that much more sad.
You know, it does. And it's interesting to note, I think, that Hearts and Minds did win the Academy Award in 1974 for Best Documentary. And a lot of people actually might remember that Oscar telecast because Bert Snyder, the producer, came out and he read a telegram of congratulations from the North Vietnamese delegation in Paris. And then backstage, the old guard hurriedly typed up a message that Frank Sinatra came out and he read.
Disassociating themselves
from any political statement. And then Warren Beatty came out and disassociated himself from Frank Sinatra. And it was... It was an example, I think, of the old guard and the new guard in Hollywood at war in public, with their dirty laundry in public about this and their disagreement about the Vietnam War.
If you can view it as a war, I think it's pretty clear who won, and that is the new guard. If winning means who made the films about Vietnam. Because the old guard only made one, that John Wayne film we talked about long ago, The War is Good and all that, and let's fight it like a routine war and win. The new guard had to wait a long time, to the last half of the decade of the 70s, but then we had lots of films. And just to go over them, we saw Vietnam veterans covered and all their problems in films like Coming Home and Rolling Thunder. We saw the war at home and the protest at home covered beautifully in Hair. We saw the surrealistic aspects, as you put it so well, the descent into madness in Apocalypse Now. I think as we look through all of these films that they were very, very good. The brutality, I forgot, in The Deer Hunter.
You know, this is a good set of films, and if you stop to think about it, I think Hollywood, the American motion picture industry, can be sort of proud because, and also television too, instead of putting out a lot of pop oilers about the routine battle scenes, blood and guts and so forth, and they took some fairly serious issues and they did a pretty good job, I think, of dealing with them seriously and thoughtfully too.
They took a long time to get there, but yes, they did do the job.
Eventually, right. That's it for this show, this look at Hollywood and Vietnam, and join Gene and me next week on Sneak Previews. Until then, we'll see you at the movies.